The rejection letter from the financial aid office felt like a death sentence in my hands. We regret to inform you that your application for additional student loans has been denied. I read the words 3 times before they sank in, each reading making my chest tighter. Northwestern University's pre-med program was everything I dreamed of, but dreams didn't pay for textbooks or keep the lights on in my cramped studio apartment. I slumped against my dorm room door, sliding down until I hit the floor. My phone buzzed with another overdue notice. This time from my mom's hospital. The chemotherapy treatments were draining what little savings our family had left. Between my tuition, her medical bills, and my little sister Emma's high school expenses, we were drowning. 3 part-time jobs weren't enough. Nothing was enough. The weight of responsibility pressed down on my shoulders like a physical force, and for the first time since starting college, I wondered if I'd have to drop out. The thought of disappointing my family, of abandoning my dream of becoming a doctor, made my stomach churn with a mixture of shame and desperation. The campus bulletin board was cluttered with the usual array of roommate-wanted ads, tutoring services, and pizza delivery flyers. I'd walked past it 100 times, barely glancing at the colorful chaos of student life announcements. But today, something caught my eye. A small, elegantly printed card tucked between a lost cat poster and an advertisement for textbook sales. The paper stock was expensive, cream-colored with embossed lettering that spoke of serious money. Seeking gestational surrogate for loving couple. $100,000 compensation plus all medical expenses. Discretion required. Contact E. Blackwood, 555 Surrogate. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone to take a picture of the card. $100,000. That wasn't just tuition money. That was enough to pay off my loans, cover mom's treatments, and maybe even help Emma with college. I'd heard about surrogacy before, seen the TV movies and documentaries. It seemed almost too good to be true, but desperation makes you consider options you never thought possible. Standing there in the hallway with students rushing past me, I felt like I was staring at a lifeline. The question was whether I was brave enough to grab it. The phone rang twice before a smooth, cultured voice answered. Blackwood Residence, Ethan speaking. There was something about his tone that commanded attention. Confident, authoritative, with just a hint of warmth that put me at ease. I'd practiced this conversation a dozen times in my head, but suddenly my carefully rehearsed words seemed to evaporate. "Hi, I'm calling about the surrogacy advertisement," I managed, gripping my phone tighter. "My name is Lily Chen, and I'm interested in learning more about the opportunity." There was a pause, and I could almost hear him appraising me through the phone. When he spoke again, his voice carried a note of genuine interest that surprised me. "Miss Chen, how wonderful that you've called. My wife Victoria and I have been hoping to find the right person to help us start our family. Would you be available to meet this weekend? We'd love to discuss the details in person." His enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself agreeing to a meeting before I'd fully processed what I was committing to. As I hung up the phone, my heart was racing with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. This could change everything, for better or worse. The meeting was set for Saturday afternoon at their estate, and I had 3 days to prepare myself for what might be the most important conversation of my life. The GPS led me down increasingly winding roads, civilization falling away with each mile until I was surrounded by towering evergreens and the kind of pristine wilderness that belonged in nature documentaries. When the Blackwood estate finally came into view, I had to pull over to catch my breath. The house was a masterpiece of modern architecture, all glass and steel rising from the forest floor like something from a luxury magazine. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the afternoon sunlight, making the structure seem to glow against the dark backdrop of ancient trees. The driveway was longer than some city blocks, perfectly maintained gravel that crunched beneath my beat-up Honda's tires. As I parked in front of the main entrance, I felt severely underdressed in my thrift store blazer and department store slacks. This wasn't just wealth. This was the kind of generational money that built empires. A woman emerged from the front door before I could even ring the bell, moving with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to being watched and admired. Victoria Blackwood was stunning in an effortless way. Her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the remote location, her smile warm but somehow calculated. "You must be Lily," she said, extending a manicured hand. "Welcome to our home. Ethan is so excited to meet you." As she led me inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into something far more complex than a simple business arrangement. Ethan Blackwood commanded attention the moment he entered the room. Tall and broad-shouldered with dark hair and the most intense green eyes I'd ever seen. He moved with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no. When he shook my hand, his grip was firm, almost possessive, and I felt a strange flutter in my chest that I immediately pushed aside. This was business, nothing more. "Miss Chen, thank you so much for coming all this way," he said, gesturing for me to sit in a leather chair that probably cost more than my car. "Victoria and I have been trying to start a family for years, but she has a rare genetic condition that makes pregnancy impossible." Victoria nodded sadly, her hand moving unconsciously to her flat stomach. The pain in her eyes seemed genuine, and I felt a surge of sympathy for both of them. They painted a picture of desperate hope. Successful careers, a beautiful home, everything money could buy except the one thing they wanted most. "We've been through 3 adoption attempts that fell through," Victoria explained, her voice catching slightly. "The uncertainty, the heartbreak. We decided surrogacy might be our best option." Ethan reached over to squeeze his wife's hand, the gesture so tender it made my chest tight. They seemed like genuinely good people who'd been dealt a cruel hand by fate. As they described their vision of family dinners and bedtime stories, I found myself wanting to help them achieve their dream. The compensation was generous, almost too generous for what seemed like a straightforward arrangement. But looking at their faces, seeing the hope mixed with fear of another disappointment, I began to think this might be exactly what we all needed. The contract was intimidating. 37 pages of legal terminology that made my head spin. I'd expected a few pages covering the basics, but this document was more comprehensive than my student loan paperwork. Ethan assured me it was standard, that their lawyer had simply been thorough to protect everyone involved. "We want to make sure you're completely comfortable with every aspect of the arrangement," he said, his smile reassuring. The compensation structure was clearly outlined. $50,000 upon successful implantation, another $50,000 upon delivery of a healthy baby. All medical expenses covered, plus a monthly allowance for living expenses. But it was the additional clauses that gave me pause. I would need to live on their property during the pregnancy, for optimal medical care and monitoring. My diet would be strictly regulated, with meals prepared by their private chef. No alcohol, no caffeine, no unauthorized medications. Standard restrictions for any pregnancy, but the language felt unusually controlling. "The isolation requirement seems extreme," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. Victoria leaned forward, her expression earnest. "We've lost so much already, Lily. This pregnancy will be precious to us, and we want to eliminate every possible risk factor. The property is beautiful, private, peaceful. The perfect environment for growing our baby." Ethan nodded in agreement. "Think of it as a pregnancy retreat. You'll have everything you need, plus the peace of mind that comes with the best possible medical care." The money was more than I'd ever imagined having, enough to solve every financial problem my family faced. As I initialed page after page, I told myself that 9 months of restrictions was a small price to pay for such life-changing compensation. The pen felt heavy in my hand as I signed my name on the final page, sealing a bargain that would prove to be far more complex than any of us had initially revealed. The guest house was larger than any apartment I'd ever lived in, complete with a full kitchen, spacious bedroom, and a living area that opened onto a private deck overlooking the forest. Victoria had decorated it with obvious care. Fresh flowers on the kitchen table, soft throws draped over comfortable furniture, books and magazines stacked neatly on the coffee table. It should have felt welcoming, but something about the perfection made me uneasy. "I hope you'll be comfortable here," Victoria said, showing me around with the enthusiasm of a proud hostess. The refrigerator is stocked with all the foods Dr. Morrison recommended for your pre-pregnancy diet. The landline connects directly to the main house if you need anything. She handed me a thick binder filled with schedules, dietary guidelines, and contact information. The level of organization was impressive and overwhelming. That first night, as I unpacked my few belongings in the spacious bedroom, I tried to process the magnitude of what I'd committed to. The silence was profound after years of living in dorm rooms and city apartments. No traffic, no neighbors arguing through thin walls, no constant urban hum. Just the whisper of wind through pine branches and the occasional sound of something moving in the underbrush. I'd always found comfort in solitude, but this felt different. Not peaceful but isolating. As I lay in the unfamiliar bed, expensive sheets smooth against my skin, I heard something that made me sit up abruptly. A long, mournful howl echoed through the forest, followed by another, then another. Victoria had mentioned wildlife, but these sounds seemed too organized, too purposeful to be random animal calls. I pulled the covers up to my chin and told myself it was just my imagination running wild in an unfamiliar place. The medical consultation took place in a room I hadn't seen during my initial tour. A fully equipped examination facility on the main house's lower level. Dr. Morrison was a tall, thin man with silver hair and the kind of intense focus that made me feel like a specimen under a microscope. His questions went far beyond standard fertility assessments, delving deep into my family history with an almost obsessive thoroughness. "Tell me about your maternal grandmother," he said, making notes on a tablet that never seemed to leave his hands. "Any unusual medical conditions? History of twins or other multiple births? Any stories about her childhood or background?" I found myself struggling to answer many of his questions. My grandmother had died when I was young, and my mother rarely talked about her family history. "She was adopted," I explained. "Found as a baby, no family records. Mom said she was always very private about her past." Dr. Morrison's eyes lit up with an interest that seemed disproportionate to the information I'd provided. He made extensive notes, occasionally glancing at Ethan, who observed from a chair in the corner. "Excellent genetic potential," the doctor murmured, more to himself than to me. "Very promising bloodlines." The phrase struck me as odd. Bloodlines was a term I associated with horses or dogs, not human fertility treatments. When I mentioned this, Dr. Morrison smiled tightly. "Genetic compatibility is crucial for successful pregnancy outcomes. Your family history suggests optimal conditions for carrying a healthy child to term." His explanation was clinical, reasonable, but something in his tone made my skin crawl. As the examination concluded and I dressed behind a privacy screen, I heard him speaking to Ethan in low, urgent whispers. I couldn't make out the words, but the excitement in their voices was unmistakable. Walking back to the guest house afterward, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just passed some kind of test I hadn't known I was taking. Sleep became elusive as my first week at the estate stretched on. The howling continued every night, growing more frequent and seeming to come from different directions around the property. During the day, when I mentioned it to Victoria, she dismissed my concerns with a wave of her hand. "The forest is full of coyotes and wolves. You'll get used to the sounds." But these weren't random animal calls. They had a pattern, almost like communication. I started keeping a notebook, documenting the sounds and trying to map where they came from. The calls always began around midnight and continued until dawn, circling the property in what seemed like organized patrols. Sometimes I could swear I heard human voices mixed in with the howling, though that was clearly impossible. The isolation was getting to me more than I'd anticipated. During the day, I rarely saw Ethan. He left early each morning and returned late at night, if at all. Victoria explained that he traveled frequently for business, but she seemed nervous when discussing his schedule. "He works in investment consulting," she said vaguely when I asked about his profession. "Very demanding, lots of travel to remote locations." The staff was equally mysterious. Groundskeepers and housekeepers who spoke little and avoided eye contact. They moved around the property with an efficiency that bordered on militaristic, always alert, always watching the tree line. I began to feel less like a honored guest and more like someone under surveillance. The cameras I'd initially attributed to normal security for wealthy people seemed to be everywhere, tracking my movements even during walks in the garden. When I asked Victoria about the extensive monitoring, she smiled that perfectly calculated smile. "We just want to keep you safe, dear. The forest can be dangerous for someone unfamiliar with the terrain." The implantation procedure was scheduled for a Thursday morning, exactly 2 weeks after my arrival. Dr. Morrison had monitored my cycle obsessively, taking daily blood samples and conducting ultrasounds to track ovulation with scientific precision. The medical facility beneath the main house was more sophisticated than many hospitals I'd seen, equipped with technology that seemed almost futuristic. "Everything looks perfect," Dr. Morrison announced as he prepared the equipment. "Your hormone levels are optimal, and the embryo is of exceptional quality." He showed me images on the ultrasound screen, a cluster of cells that would hopefully become the Blackwood's long-awaited child. Victoria held my hand during the procedure, her own hands trembling with emotion. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea what this means to us." The procedure itself was routine, no different from what I'd researched online about IVF treatments. But it was afterward that things felt strange. Instead of the standard post-procedure rest period, Dr. Morrison insisted on an extended observation. "We want to monitor the implantation process closely," he explained, hooking me up to machines that tracked everything from heart rate to body temperature. "The first 48 hours are crucial for successful attachment." I spent 2 days in the medical facility, drifting in and out of sleep induced by mild sedatives that Dr. Morrison claimed would optimize implantation conditions. During my lucid moments, I heard conversations between him and Ethan that seemed to have nothing to do with standard fertility medicine. They spoke in whispers about genetic markers and bloodline compatibility, and the first generation. When I asked about their discussions, they dismissed my concerns as effects of the medication. "Just medical terminology," Ethan assured me. "Nothing you need to worry about." But lying in that sterile room, connected to machines and isolated from the outside world, I began to wonder if I'd gotten myself into something far more complicated than a simple surrogacy arrangement. 2 weeks after the procedure, the pregnancy test showed 2 bright pink lines. Dr. Morrison's excitement was barely contained as he confirmed the results with blood work. "Exceptional hormone levels," he murmured, making detailed notes. "Better than we could have hoped for." Victoria cried tears of joy when they told her, embracing me like I was family rather than hired help. But something felt different about this pregnancy from the beginning. The usual symptoms, morning sickness, fatigue, food aversions, were either absent or strangely muted. Instead, I felt energized, almost hyper-aware of my surroundings. My hearing seemed sharper, able to pick up conversations from the main house, even from my guest quarters. The forest sounds that had once disturbed me now felt almost familiar, like a language I was beginning to understand. As my first month of pregnancy progressed, I began to notice a pattern in the household's behavior. Every full moon, Ethan would disappear for 3 days. Victoria would become increasingly agitated, pacing the house and snapping at the staff. The groundskeepers would work in teams, patrolling the property perimeter with an intensity that seemed excessive for normal security. "Where does Ethan go during these trips?" I asked Victoria one evening as we watched the full moon rise through the living room windows. Her smile was tight, practiced. "Business retreats. Very intensive, no outside contact allowed." The explanation felt rehearsed, like she'd given it many times before. That night, the howling was louder and more organized than ever, coming from what sounded like dozens of voices rather than the usual handful. I first really noticed Caleb during my 6th week of pregnancy. He was tending to the garden outside my kitchen window, moving with a fluid grace that caught my attention. Unlike the other staff members who avoided eye contact, he looked up when he saw me watching and offered a genuine smile that made my heart skip unexpectedly. He was Ethan's opposite in every way. Where Ethan was sharp angles and cold calculation, Caleb was warm curves and easy laughter. His dark hair fell across his forehead as he worked, and when he rolled up his sleeves, I could see intricate tattoos covering his forearms. "Beautiful morning," he called out, and his voice had a musical quality that made me want to hear more of it. "You're the groundskeeper?" I asked, stepping onto the deck. He chuckled, a sound that seemed to vibrate through my chest. "Among other things. I'm Caleb, Ethan's brother." The family resemblance was there if I looked for it, but their energy was completely different. Where Ethan made me feel observed and analyzed, Caleb made me feel seen and appreciated. Caleb began finding excuses to work near the guest house. He'd appear with fresh vegetables from the garden, tools to fix things that weren't broken, or simply to check on how I was feeling. Our conversations started brief and polite but gradually deepened into something that felt dangerously close to friendship. "You seem different from when you first arrived," he observed one afternoon, helping me tend to the small herb garden outside my kitchen. "More alert, more present." He was right, though I couldn't explain the change. The pregnancy was affecting me in ways I'd never read about in any book. Heightened senses, increased energy, an almost predatory awareness of my surroundings. "Is that bad?" I asked, and he shook his head quickly. "Not bad at all. Just unexpected." There was something in his tone, a knowledge he wasn't sharing. When our hands accidentally touched while reaching for the same plant, I felt a jolt of electricity that had nothing to do with static. The way he pulled back, his eyes widening slightly, told me he'd felt it too. By my 8th week, the baby's movements were unmistakably strong. Dr. Morrison seemed fascinated by the ultrasounds, spending long minutes studying images that looked normal to me. "Remarkable development," he kept muttering. "Accelerated growth patterns, enhanced bone density." He scheduled additional appointments, drawing blood samples twice weekly now instead of monthly. One evening, as I walked past Ethan's study, I heard him on a phone call that made my blood run cold. "The breeding program is ahead of schedule," he was saying. "This one's responding better than any of the previous subjects. We'll have our first viable offspring within the year." The clinical way he spoke about my pregnancy, referring to me as a subject rather than a person, sent ice through my veins. I backed away from the door quickly, but not before hearing him continue. "Begin preparations for the next phase. We'll need at least 6 more carriers if we want to establish a proper bloodline." 6 more. This wasn't about one baby. This was about creating an entire generation. And I was just the first in what sounded like a horrifying assembly line. That night sleep was impossible. I paced my guest house like a caged animal, my mind racing with implications of what I'd overheard. Breeding program. Previous subjects. The words echoed in my head with sickening clarity. How many women had been in my position before? What had happened to them? I tried calling my mother, desperate for her familiar voice, but the call went straight to voicemail. Strange. She always answered, especially knowing about my pregnancy. When I tried my sister Emma, the same thing happened. A cold dread settled in my stomach as I realized I hadn't spoken to either of them in over a week, despite leaving multiple messages. Outside, the howling began earlier than usual, closer to the house. Through my bedroom window, I could see shapes moving between the trees. Too large to be ordinary wolves, too coordinated to be random animals. One shadow paused at the edge of the clearing, and for a moment, I could swear it looked directly at me with glowing amber eyes. The next morning, Caleb appeared at my door with fresh coffee and dark circles under his eyes that matched my own. "You look like you didn't sleep," he said, studying my face with an intensity that made me self-conscious. "Everything all right?" I wanted to tell him about the phone call, about my growing fears, but something held me back. Instead, I found myself asking, "Caleb, what exactly does your brother do for work?" His expression immediately became guarded, the easy warmth in his eyes flickering with something that looked like fear. "Why do you ask?" he said carefully, setting down the coffee mug with deliberate precision. The casual gesture couldn't hide the tension that had suddenly filled the space between us. Just curious. He travels so much, and Victoria is always vague about his business. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, seeming to weigh his words. Some things are better left unknown, Lily. Trust me on that. Unable to shake my unease, I decided to do some investigating of my own. The guest house had Wi-Fi, and during my afternoon rest period, I began searching for information about the Blackwood family. What I found was troubling. Or rather, what I didn't find was troubling. Ethan and Victoria Blackwood had virtually no digital footprint beyond the last 5 years. No social media profiles, no business listings, no public records that predated their current address. It was as if they'd simply materialized into existence half a decade ago. Even their marriage certificate was recent. Only 3 years old, despite Victoria claiming they'd been trying to have children for much longer. The property records were equally strange. The estate had been purchased through a shell company registered in Delaware, with ownership buried under layers of corporate entities that led nowhere. Professional genealogy sites turned up nothing about either of their family histories. For people who lived like old money aristocrats, they had no documented legacy whatsoever. I closed my laptop with shaking hands, more convinced than ever that I'd stumbled into something dangerous. Dr. Morrison's weekly appointment felt different this time. His questions were more probing, focused less on standard prenatal care and more on my family history and personal background. "Tell me more about your grandmother's adoption," he said, leaning forward with predatory interest. "Any details about where she was found? What the circumstances were?" I repeated what little I knew. That she'd been discovered as a baby in the woods. No family or identifying information. Dr. Morrison made extensive notes, occasionally glancing at charts and documents I couldn't see. "And your mother never showed any unusual abilities? Enhanced senses, exceptional strength, intuitive knowledge about things she shouldn't know?" The questions were bizarre, completely unrelated to prenatal care. "Why are you asking these things?" I demanded, but he waved off my concerns with clinical detachment. "Genetic predispositions can affect fetal development. We're simply being thorough." But his eyes held a hunger that had nothing to do with medical care and everything to do with something far more sinister. That evening, I decided to confront Victoria directly. I found her in the main house library, surrounded by books that looked ancient and expensive. When I entered, she quickly closed the volume she'd been reading, but not before I caught a glimpse of the cover. Something about bloodlines and hereditary traits. "Victoria, I need to ask you something, and I want a straight answer," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "What exactly are you and Ethan involved in? And don't tell me it's just business consulting." Her perfectly composed expression faltered for just a moment, long enough for me to see fear flash across her features. "I'm not sure what you mean," she said, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. "You're carrying our child, Lily. That's all that matters." But as she spoke, I noticed something I'd never seen before. Her canine teeth seemed longer, sharper than they should be. When she realized I was staring, she pressed her lips together quickly, but the damage was done. "What are you?" I whispered, backing toward the door. Victoria's laugh was hollow, desperate. "We're people who've been waiting a very long time for someone like you, dear. And now that we've found you, we're never letting you go." I ran back to the guest house, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. With shaking hands, I grabbed my emergency bag, the one I'd packed weeks ago when my instincts first started screaming warnings. Car keys, phone, what little cash I had. I had to get out of here before whatever Victoria was planning came to pass. But when I reached my car, all 4 tires were flat. Not punctured, completely shredded, as if torn apart by massive claws. My phone showed no signal, which was impossible since I'd had full bars just hours earlier. From the main house, I could see lights moving behind windows, shadows of people gathering, or things that looked like people. A hand touched my shoulder and I spun around, ready to fight. It was Caleb, his face grave in the moonlight. "Don't scream," he said quietly. I'm here to help you, but we don't have much time. They know you overheard the conversation. What are they? I demanded as Caleb led me away from the guest house, moving through shadows with practiced stealth. He was silent for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with shame and regret. Werewolves, he said simply. The whole pack. We've been searching for someone with your bloodline for decades. The word hung between us like a physical presence. Werewolves. Part of me wanted to laugh at the absurdity, but I'd seen Victoria's teeth, heard the organized howling, felt the wrongness in my bones. And you? I asked, though I already knew the answer. His eyes flashed golden in the darkness, confirming my fears. I'm sorry, Lily. I wanted to tell you, but Ethan would have killed us both. He stopped walking and turned to face me. But I'm not like them. I don't believe in what they're doing to you, to other women. That's why I'm getting you out of here. As we moved through the forest, Caleb explained the horrifying truth. The Blackwoods weren't just a wealthy couple desperate for children. They were the leaders of a werewolf pack trying to create a new generation of hybrids. Your bloodline, he said, helping me over a fallen log, carries hunter genes. Werewolf hunters from centuries ago. That's impossible, I protested, but even as I said it, I remembered Dr. Morrison's strange questions about my grandmother's mysterious background. Hunter blood mixed with werewolf genetics creates incredibly powerful offspring, Caleb continued. Stronger, faster, more intelligent than pure werewolves. Ethan wants to breed an army. The baby in my womb seemed to respond to his words, moving more actively than usual. How many others have there been? I asked, dreading the answer. Caleb's silence was answer enough. We weren't just fleeing from kidnappers. We were escaping from serial killers who'd been perfecting their methods for years. Deep in the forest, Caleb led me to a small cabin hidden among towering pines. Inside it was stocked with supplies, medical equipment, food, weapons. I've been preparing this place for months, he explained, lighting a kerosene lamp. Ever since I realized what Ethan was really planning. Why help me? I asked, settling into a wooden chair as another contraction like pain shot through my abdomen. Caleb knelt beside me, his hand hovering over my belly without quite touching. Because you're my mate, he said quietly. I felt it the first day I saw you, but the baby. It's responding to our bond. It's as much mine now as Ethan's. The revelation should have been shocking, but instead it felt like puzzle pieces clicking into place. The electric connection I'd felt with Caleb, the way my body had changed during pregnancy, the baby's unusual strength. Mate bonds can form even during pregnancy, he explained. Especially with hunter bloodlines. Your body recognized what it needed to protect itself and the child. We didn't have long to process this information before the howling started. Closer than I'd ever heard it before. Through the cabin windows, we could see lights moving through the trees. Flashlights and glowing eyes. A search party that was both human and decidedly not human. They've found our trail, Caleb said, moving to secure the cabin's reinforced door. The cabin's protected with silver-lined walls, but it won't hold them forever. He handed me a pistol loaded with what looked like unusual ammunition. Silver bullets, he explained. If they get inside, aim for center mass. The howling grew louder, more organized. I could hear Ethan's voice calling through the forest. Lily, there's nowhere to run. Come back now and we won't hurt you. But his tone held no warmth, only the cold calculation of a predator who'd cornered his prey. The baby kicked violently, as if sensing the danger we were in. While we waited in tense silence, Caleb pulled out a manila folder he'd been carrying. There's something else you need to know about your family, he said, spreading old documents across the cabin's small table. Your grandmother wasn't just found in the woods. She was the sole survivor of a werewolf hunter family massacre. The documents were old, some handwritten, others typed on vintage letterhead. Police reports from 1952 describing the violent deaths of the Chen family noted hunters who'd been tracking a particularly vicious pack. Sarah Chen was 3 years old when they found her, Caleb explained. Hidden in a root cellar while her parents and siblings were killed. She suppressed her hunter abilities to survive, he continued, but the genetics stayed dormant in your family line. That's why Dr. Morrison was so interested in your blood work. You're not just carrying hunter genes. You're carrying the specific bloodline of one of the most powerful hunter families in history. The baby's movements intensified as he spoke, as if responding to the revelation of its true heritage. The attack came at midnight. The cabin shook as something massive threw itself against the reinforced door. Through the windows, I could see shapes moving in the darkness. Some human, some decidedly not. Ethan's voice carried clearly through the night air. "Send her out, Caleb, and I might let you live." "Never," Caleb shouted back, chambering a silver bullet. The door splintered under another assault, and I could see claws extending through the cracks. Whatever was trying to get in was no longer bothering to maintain human form. The silver lining in the walls made the werewolves hesitate, but their desperation was overcoming their pain. A window exploded inward, and Victoria's transformed face appeared in the opening. Elongated snout, glowing eyes, teeth like razors. She was still recognizably herself, but twisted into something nightmarish. "Give us the child," she snarled, "and we'll make your death quick." I raised the pistol with shaking hands, but found I couldn't pull the trigger. Despite everything, she looked too human, too much like the woman who'd held my hand during the implantation. That moment of hesitation nearly cost us everything. Victoria lunged through the broken window, claws extended toward my throat. But something extraordinary happened. Light erupted from my hands, silver and brilliant, throwing her backward with a howl of pain. I stared at my palms in shock. The light was still there, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. "Your hunter abilities," Caleb breathed, wonder and fear mixing in his voice. "The pregnancy activated them." The power felt natural, like flexing a muscle I'd never known I possessed. Outside, the attacking werewolves whimpered and retreated from the cabin. The silver light pouring from my hands was affecting them even through the walls. "Impossible," Ethan's voice carried through the night, filled with rage and disbelief. "The bloodline was supposed to be dormant. How is she accessing hunter magic?" "Love," Caleb said softly, understanding dawning in his eyes. "The mate bond awakened your full heritage." He reached for my hand, and when our fingers touched, the silver light intensified, becoming almost blinding. The combined power of hunter magic and werewolf strength was unlike anything either of us had imagined possible. With my newfound abilities, we weren't prey anymore. We were predators. I could sense every werewolf in the surrounding forest, their locations as clear as if they were marked on a map. The baby in my womb seemed to be channeling power to me, making me stronger with each passing moment. "There are 12 of them," I told Caleb, my voice steady despite the magnitude of what we were facing. "Ethan, Victoria, Dr. Morrison, and 9 others. They've surrounded the cabin, but they're keeping their distance now." The silver light made me feel invincible, like I could take on an entire army. Caleb looked at me with something that might have been pride. "What do you want to do?" he asked. I thought about all the women who'd been in my position before me, all the children who'd been bred like livestock for Ethan's twisted vision. The anger that rose in me was pure and righteous, and it fed the power flowing through my veins. "We end this," I said, standing and moving toward the door. "Tonight." We stepped out of the cabin together, my hand blazing with silver fire, Caleb's eyes glowing golden beside me. The werewolves formed a circle around us, but none dared come closer than 20 feet. The combined aura we projected was too painful for them to bear. Ethan stood directly in front of us, still in human form but with his true nature clearly visible. Elongated canines, eyes that reflected light like an animal's, muscles that moved with predatory grace. "You don't understand what you're destroying," he said, his voice carrying a desperate edge. "We're creating the future of our species." "You're creating slaves," I replied, raising my glowing hand higher. The light seemed to burn him even at a distance. "How many women did you murder when they outlived their usefulness?" His silence was answer enough. Victoria moved to stand beside her husband, her face a mask of rage and thwarted ambition. "The child belongs to us," she hissed. "We paid for it, we created it, we own it." The possessive way she spoke about my baby ignited something primal in me. The silver light exploded outward, and every werewolf in the circle stumbled backward, howling in pain. When the light faded, Ethan and Victoria were on their knees, their supernatural strength stripped away by the force of my rage. "The child belongs to no one but themselves," I said, my voice carrying power that resonated through the forest. "And neither do I." With Ethan and Victoria kneeling before me, weakened by the silver light that poured from my very soul, I faced a choice that would define who I truly was. The power flowing through me whispered of justice, of ending their threat permanently. But somewhere beneath the rage and fear, my human conscience fought back. "Lily," Caleb said softly, his hand touching my shoulder, "you don't have to become like them." His touch helped ground me, reminded me that revenge and justice weren't the same thing. The other pack members had retreated further into the forest, but I could sense their terror, their submission to the power I'd never known I possessed. Dr. Morrison stepped forward from the circle, his hands raised in surrender. "The research," he said desperately. "Everything we've learned about hunter-werewolf genetics, about creating the next evolution of both species. You could lead us instead of destroying us." Even now, even defeated, he was thinking like a scientist, trying to salvage his life's work. "Your research was built on murder and kidnapping," I replied, the silver light pulsing with my anger. "There is no next evolution through force and breeding programs." The baby kicked strongly, as if agreeing with my words. Whatever child I carried would be born free, not as part of anyone's grand design. "What happened to the other women?" I demanded, stepping closer to Ethan. The silver light made him flinch, but he couldn't look away from my eyes. "How many died for your perfect bloodline?" His silence stretched until Victoria finally broke, tears streaming down her face as she confessed. "7, she whispered. 7 women over the past 3 years. The pregnancies. They were too powerful for normal human bodies to handle. They died during delivery." The casual way she spoke about those deaths, as if they were failed experiments rather than murdered women, made my power surge dangerously. "Their names," I said, my voice carrying the force of absolute command. "Tell me their names." As Victoria recited each name, Sarah Martinez, Jennifer Liu, Rebecca Washington, and 4 others, I committed them to memory. These women deserved to be remembered as more than failed test subjects. Caleb moved closer to his brother, and I could see the pain in his eyes. "How could you?" he asked Ethan. "How could you become this?" Ethan's laugh was bitter, broken. "Survival," he said. "Our kind is dying out, being hunted to extinction. This was the only way to ensure our future." But his justification sounded hollow even to his own ears. The silver light wasn't just affecting the werewolves physically. It was breaking the psychic bonds that held their pack together. I could feel their individual minds separating from Ethan's control, confusion and fear replacing blind loyalty. Several of the younger pack members had already shifted back to human form, looking lost and terrified. "The pack bond," Caleb explained, watching his former packmates with a mixture of pity and relief. "Your power is severing their connection to Ethan. They're free to make their own choices now." Some of the werewolves were already melting back into the forest, fleeing from a situation that no longer made sense to them. Dr. Morrison, ever the opportunist, tried to appeal to the remaining pack members. "We can rebuild," he called out. "Find a new alpha. Continue the research through voluntary participation." But the wolves who remained weren't listening to him anymore. Without Ethan's domination, they could see the horror of what they'd been part of. "There will be no more research," I said, my voice carrying to every corner of the forest clearing. "No more breeding programs, no more murdered women. This ends tonight." The finality in my tone left no room for argument. Whatever happened next, the Blackwood Pack's reign of terror was over. They thought the worst was over. But deep beneath the forest, the real enemy had only just awakened. As the truth behind the breeding program unravels, new allies rise, and darker threats emerge. And the child Lily carries, it's more than a baby. It's a weapon the world has never seen. The war is coming, and no one is ready. This was just the beginning. Watch out for part 2 of the Surrogate's Wolfsbane, coming soon. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next and to discover more interesting videos like this.